Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Before we jump into the show, I just want to thank my sponsors and collaborators. 3D Network Technology, reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com for more information. We'd also like to thank the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit www.360lifetransformations.com. We'd also like to thank Canadian Security Magazine and Omnigo Software. And now, let's get into today's show. Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast. I'm joined today by Antoinette King. Antoinette, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to start off with a question that I ask every guest in the beginning. Who is Antoinette King?
Oh man, so that's a very multi-dimensional question. So I am a mother, I'm a wife, but I'm also a security professional. And the being in the security industry has always been a calling for me. I'm one of the rare people who came into this industry by design. So I just, for me, it's about the mission. And when I started getting into cybersecurity a few years back, that mission just got stronger. And so, yeah, that's about it.
Now, one thing I found interesting about you is that even though you did go that security path, your very original goal was to get into the military, and you actually had the appointment and everything. What was the kind of the story behind shifting gears there?
Oh, it's a silly story, but it has a happy ending. So when I was in high school, I really wanted to go down the path of Annapolis. And so I went through the process of, getting an appointment. And at the time I was dating a guy. Thankfully, he ended up being my husband. But I realized, this is going to be 4 years at the academy and 6 years of active duty. And so I decided not to go that route. And then I was thinking, all right, well, I'll go into law enforcement. And he also wanted to go into law enforcement. So I went to school for criminal justice and then went to John Jay for a semester for forensic psychology because I really thought, I wanted to be in the FBI. And then SUNY Farmingdale out on Long Island called me and said, hey, we've got this brand new program we want you to check out, because that's where I got my associate's degree, called Managing Security Systems. And I was like, all right. And I was on Long Island and I was commuting into the city. So I'd have to take a 5 o'clock train. So I was young and just didn't want to get on the train anymore. So I'm like, yeah, this seems cool. And so I went through their program and was the first graduating class. And it was at that moment where I realized, okay, I definitely think this is, I always knew that I wanted to be in law enforcement and something to do with, technology maybe, but that was really kind of what sealed the deal, getting to understand security and that it actually is a career path. For me, security was a security guard or a police officer. I didn't realize there was a dimension of technology. And so when I graduated that year, I actually started teaching because the program was so new, they didn't have professors. And since I went and got my MCSE back when Windows NT was the operating system of choice, many, many, many years ago, I got my first job as a technician in the industry because I had some computer background. And the chairperson of the program at Farmingdale had the foresight in the late 90s to recognize that the IT was going to merge with security, because at the time everything was analog. And so I got that first job as a tech, and that's why they allowed me to teach, because instead of having my master's degree, they took my professional experience in lieu of that. And so I taught for 7 years in the program, which was super exciting because I got to see, 7 groups of people go through it and introduce security as a viable career. Not many people know about it. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your career now. Just from what I've been able to hear about you, you were actually working as a technician until, I don't know if you continue to be on this point, but I heard a story that you were, pregnant, like 6 months pregnant, still climbing up and down ladders.
Yeah. Yep, that's the story. I had the fortunate opportunity to work for an integrator that did a lot of work at the Statue of Liberty for a long time before 9/11 and then post 9/11. And it was 2003, and I was on a ladder doing some work, and I was 6 months pregnant. I couldn't fit my tool belt on me anymore, so I just hung it over the side of the ladder. And one of the guys from the Parks Police looked up at me. He's like, you just got to get rid of the ladder. You can't be doing this anymore. And that was really hard for me because, again, being a tech and being able to build systems and watch them come to life was my favorite job thus far, except maybe for what I'm doing now. But in my career, it was my favorite job because, that's the creative side of technology, right? Is starting from scratch and then building something and watching it work. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I guess I'm sure it was a good foundation for everything that you did after that and what you're doing today.
Yeah. And again, because I had an amazing advisor in college and he believed in me. And looking back, I think it's really interesting because I never ever thought that I couldn't be a technician, because he was like, well, you want to be a tech first because that's going to give you the skill set to be a really good practitioner. And you need to understand the inner workings of systems in order to do anything else in the industry. That was his, perspective. Other people have different opinions, but it worked for me. But it never occurred to me that as a woman, that I couldn't be a technician. It just never was a thing until I became a tech. And then all of a sudden I would walk on a job site and it would be like a record scratch and everybody would just turn around like, who hired the stripper, because here I am with a ladder, tool belt, work boots, ponytail, I'm 24 years old, and they're just like 23. And they're just like, what the heck? So that was the first time I realized that was a thing. And then probably the first 17 years of my career, I could count on two hands how many women that I worked with that were practitioners, that weren't in maybe marketing or finance in the security industry. So I'm really excited about this bloom of young women in our industry. It's still not enough, but it's far better than it was when I started. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, I'll say even locally here, there's a couple of colleges that I teach at, and I'm finding, more and more each year. I'd say there's actually more females than males in the classes that I'm teaching.
That's fantastic.
And it's all security content. So now, were you always interested in technology, or is this something that kind of came later in life?
No, I always was. I remember in sixth grade, this is so silly, I'm totally dating myself, but in fifth and sixth grade, our elementary school had gotten our first Commodore 64 computers, and we had a computer lab because we only could get 6. And, back then you had they actually put you in groups based on, your abilities. It wasn't everybody got put in the group, and I'm trying to be really politically correct about this. So I was in the smart kid group, right? And I was one of 20 kids in the 5th grade that had the opportunity to work on the computers. And we would double up at the computers and we would just learn, different things. And I remember my dad, I came from upper middle class, but my dad was blue collar worker. He owned a auto body shop, and he got an Atari 800. And I have an older sister and a younger brother, and I was in 6th grade, and my sister and I wanted to play Pong and Frogger and all these games. And my dad couldn't afford to buy the actual game. So he went to Radio Shack and he bought a spiral bound book, and it was the codes it was how to write the games. I don't know any better. So my sister and I sat next to each other at the computer and we took turns reading the syntax. And that was when I learned, if you miss a comma or a hyphen, nothing works. So be careful with your syntax. And we wrote the games. And then again, dating myself, we would save them on cassette tapes because that's how you saved your games. There wasn't even a floppy drive yet. And we would save them on the cassette tapes. And whenever we want to play a game, we just pop the tape in and hit play and turn the computer on, and it worked. So again, my dad never made us feel like because we were girls, we couldn't do that stuff. So we were very hands-on, and I was always building stuff and creating things. So yeah, technology has just always been in my life, for as long as it's been available. My dad had one of those original cell phones with the giant rubber duck antenna, it cost $15 a minute. He was always into that kind of stuff. And so it was exciting for me, I guess, because he's a mechanical, has a mechanical brain. So we always had cool things to tinker with.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of your career, who are some of the people that really helped guide you and helped you get to where you are now?
Well, the first person was that chairperson, John Kostanowski. He was a mentor for me and at SUNY Farmingdale, and really put me on the path. Total Recall was the first company I ever worked for, and Jordan and Rich Highwell and Frank Junzo were my first three bosses. And each one of them had a really strong influence for different reasons. But Frank, he passed away, unfortunately, from cancer, but Frank really, truly taught me how to be a tech and how to pay attention to detail. Jordan was always the business person, and he taught me a lot about business. And Rich is so compassionate, so he taught me how to build relationships with customers. So that was really the foundation for everything else that I did in my career. Also, wire management. They were sticklers for wire management. And the blessing to work for a company that puts quality before anything else, when you've never done anything before, is you don't develop bad habits. And so I was so blessed to be able to work for that company, because they taught me how to pay attention to detail, how to make sure your rack wire management is good, how to document things. And that was all really the foundation. As I go through my career, I always fall back on all of that. And I've worked for some companies where, when I worked for Total Recall, we would drop off a book and it would have all of the things that the customer needed. And so for me, it was like the Bible, right? It was before everything was digitized. Again, dating myself, but we have this giant, 4-inch binder, and any technician that went to work on that job just had to go to that binder and they'd have all the information that they needed to be able to do the job properly. There were a couple of companies I worked for after that where they're like, no, we're not going to do that, because then the competitor can come and do the work. And Total Recall never worried about that, because our customers wanted to work with us because we were that good, right? We didn't have to worry about the lower price person coming in, because we took care of our customers. So it was really foreign to me that they were worried about that, right? And then I realized, okay, well, if you're not giving them quality service and making them want to do business with you, then they should have the opportunity to go somewhere else. So that was the first major influence. And then as I went through the industry, a gentleman by the name of Mike Chafee, who I came into contact with through a lot of work that I did with FLIR systems, he truly set me on the path to where I am today, and still continues to be a beacon of light. And he's just such an amazing human being. So again, I wish I had more female mentors, but unfortunately at the time, I really didn't have those mentors. And now I'm just surrounded by so many incredible women. And I don't want to start naming them off, because I know I'm going to miss them and I'm going to take too much time. But I can assure you, I have the most incredible group of very professional women in the security industry that do nothing but grab my hand and pull me up, and then I grab the next one and I pull her up. And so it is such an exciting time to be in this industry right now.
Awesome stuff. Now, you kind of shifted to an entrepreneurial venture. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So again, when I started to get involved in manufacturing, when I started working at Access Communications, I had the opportunity to really see things from a different vantage point. I'd always been on the integration side. And so our answer to IT or InfoSec, right, on the security side and integration is we just build our own network. We're going to microsegment everything and we won't even talk to IT. So, and I say that and I take ownership for that, because it in the infancy of that convergence, that first phase of convergence, that's what we did. We just bought some switches, and we built a network and we did our own thing, because IT was always the roadblock and we just needed to get the job done. And so as I'm in manufacturing and I'm realizing that, a lot of the product feature sets from a security perspective are being driven by the end customer, I started really digging a little more deeply into that. And I recognized that governance and compliance at the large global end customers, enterprise end customers, were forcing the manufacturers to build products that had really strong endpoint security features in them. But nobody was advising the integrator about how to implement them. So there was this huge chasm of lack of knowledge about endpoint security. And so I started digging into cyber, and I went back to school and I got my master's degree in cyber policy and risk analysis, because I needed to learn more about it in order to help other people. I mentioned to you that I worked at SUNY Farmingdale. Instructing, teaching is at the core of what I do. And even though I spent 15 years of my career in sales, I never was a salesperson. I never sold a SKU. I always, like I said, I always had an engineering brain and I always liked to be mechanical. So the way that I sold was really selling solutions and understanding customer problems. This was a problem and I needed to find a solution for it. So I was blessed to work with Access. They are an incredible company. At the time I wanted to continue there working around cyber, but there's only so many positions in a company for that role. So the timing didn't work out. So we parted ways amicably. I'm still a huge brand ambassador for Access. They're incredible people and they'll always be my family. But I decided to start a consulting firm that bridges the gap between domains of InfoSec, cybersecurity, physical security, because really all of those things dovetail into one another and they need to be looked at as a holistic security posture. And most organizations have these silos where, InfoSec has its own thing and physical security has its own thing. And there's even cyber people that are separate from InfoSec, right? This can't happen because we're just going to continue to increase the attack vector if we don't make this all under one synergistic security program. Things like the CMS, Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification are coming out. It's being rolled out slowly through the DoD, but it's a really brilliant way to attack cyber maturity at procurement. So we've got, organizations that want to do business with the Department of Defense now have to demonstrate through a third-party audit that they have a specific level of cyber maturity to handle whatever documentation they're going to get through the contract that they sign up for. If they can't demonstrate that, they can't even bid. So it's important to me. I always have had an affinity for the channel. It's important for me to help organizations, especially integrators, grow their cyber maturity. I believe that the security organization in any company should be the guide rails on how they do business. It should be business enablement rather than the roadblock, because security always prevents people think security is going to prevent people from doing what they want. And products are developed. And this is where we run into trouble with product management. So I'm sorry if any product managers are listening to this, but we run into trouble because functionality always trumps security. Security needs to be part of the culture of the organization. Secure by design needs to be our go-to. We can't be pumping out products and software with known vulnerabilities. We can't be pumping out products and software that we're not having code scans and vulnerability scans and pen testing done in advance of releasing them. We have to get out of it. I understand companies need to make money, but we have got to stop that cycle, because the more we do that, the more vulnerable companies are. And no matter what controls organizations put in place, if the product is by default vulnerable, those controls are not going to make a difference. Because when those 0 days are explored and exploited, there's nothing that you can do about it. So we need to limit that.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of shift focus to healthcare specifically now.
Absolutely.
So healthcare from a cyber standpoint, been under attack for a number of years. What are kind of your observations of healthcare in, from your consulting hat?
Yeah. So this podcast actually is extremely timely because IBM just came out with their 2021 breach notification and report. It's called the 2021 cost of data breach, report. And the healthcare industry was at the top. By far, the cost of data breaches are higher with the healthcare industry than almost any other industry, with the average incident at $9.23 million, up $2 million from just last year. And wow. So that's a problem. And the cost, that 9.23, includes legal fees, regulatory fees, technical expenses, and loss of brand trust, loss of customers, and loss of productivity. So that's a big problem. And it's really stems from, according to that report, it really stems from this transition of the remote workforce. We no longer have physical parameters around our building. It's, it's borderless. So in the past, IT organizations within a company are able to control data going in and out of their facility with actual controls. Now we've got people working from home remotely, not only within the healthcare organizations, the hospitals, but also their suppliers. So think about that. Attack vector just exploded, right? And so the supply chain has a lot to do with these attacks. It's not just the hospitals. Law firms that are supporting hospitals and healthcare industry are being attacked, vendors, the pharmaceutical companies, manufacturers. So just like any other industry, it all ties into the soft underbelly, which is really the supply chain.
Okay, now as a consultant, if you're coming into a healthcare environment, what are, I guess, kind of, can you walk us through the process of what you're doing to kind of help them protect themselves?
Yeah. So first thing you do is an assessment, right? You kind of find what the baseline is and where you're at. And I can say that in defense of hospitals, let's say, and other large organizations, typically they're doing the right things. The problem, I say, 99% of the problem is typically between the chair and the keyboard. So it's not necessarily the physical controls that are in place, but the lack of training. And the healthcare industry is under attack, not just from cyber, but from every direction. There's a lack of employees, right? So employees are being tasked with doing multiple jobs. There's, lack of skilled workers. There's so many, obviously with the pandemic, there's all these new protocols and focuses that they have to worry about. So the last thing people are thinking about is double checking their emails to make sure it's being sent from the proper person. So, things like phishing scams are just easy to kind of fall victim to, and that's where the ransomware typically comes from, is some sort of credential breach, or breach into the company with malware based on a phishing scam. So building out that culture of security with training, making sure that systems are up to date. I can't tell you again, because everybody's doing multiple jobs, just updating firmware could be a job in and of itself for a hospital, right? And it's not just firmware. And the people think cybersecurity and InfoSec, they're thinking about their computers and their printers and their mobile phones and laptops. But all of the other operational technology, all of the other devices that are IoT, I can assure you are not being designed with security in mind. So there are probably multiple firmware updates quarterly, if not, monthly, for all of these devices, right? Things like X-ray machines and other things that are on networks, they need to be updated, because if they're not, those are the things that are going to be exploited. And it's just like any other industry. Typically, it's not the actual proper organization with their IT network. It's some external operational technology that ends up getting exploited and becomes the window into an organization. I'd venture to say that if you sat and you walked into any healthcare organization, whether they're a manufacturer, whether they're a hospital, and asked them when was the last time they updated the firmware on some extraneous device, they'd probably say never.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. And kind of, you made me think of another interesting point. I know overseas a couple of years back, there was a big problem with medical devices being hacked, even life-saving equipment.
Yes.
I think pacemakers was part of that as well.
Yeah, because these devices, actually, when I was in school, one of the young women that were in one of my classes, we were talking about the healthcare industry in particular, and she had a Bluetooth insulin pump. And so she decided to do her research project on this insulin pump, and she found out some very scary things. And that's her own personal body, right? That the Bluetooth technology that they were using could be intercepted. So if somebody's in her vicinity, they could actually alter her pump, which is crazy to think that could happen. But when a company is designing a product like that, they're not thinking about the bad guys that might want to do something to alter it. And even outside of the healthcare industry, we think about autonomous vehicles, right? And we've got this whole thing, it's like right to repair going on, where people are like, well, I want to be able to repair my car, and Teslas, you have to go to the Tesla facility to get repaired because you can't. Well, okay, that's all well and good, except, and I'm not picking on Tesla, I'm picking on anything that requires you to have software to run it. What happens if there's an insider threat? What happens if somebody gets paid off? What happens if somebody accidentally does whatever, and now the malware's in the system and they have access to all the vehicles? We're not thinking about, as we grow as a society and we start making things more functional and easier to use, we are not thinking about what we are doing in terms of attack vector. It's just so vast. Medical devices is the most important device that should be secure by design, but they're not, right? And so this fundamental shift mentality around security has to happen from the top down. CEOs and other leaders of organizations need to stop putting profits before security.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it too just comes down to that convenience, right? People want their convenience, but that's not necessarily conducive to a secure environment.
100%.
So I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. Is there an opportunity to achieve the correct balance, or are we going to have to really choose one over the other?
Yeah, there's always a balance, right? It depends on what the asset is. And this is another thing that I talk with any organization is, I'm not going to take this Sharpie marker and I'm not going to spend $1 million to secure the Sharpie marker. If the Sharpie marker gets stolen, I'll just replace it with another Sharpie marker, right? So we have to really think about our assets, and we have to categorize. And this is part of the assessment process. You have to understand your assets. You have to understand what their values are. You have to understand what the risks are. And then you strike the balance. How much do I want to invest, first of all, financially, in terms of controls to protect this asset? How much technology and human resources do I want to put into it? But then also, what is the risk and what happens if it's breached, right? Records, although we don't want that to happen, records are going to be less important than someone's life. When we talk about the products that we're designing to save someone's life. So whether it's an insulin pump or a defibrillator or whatever it is, right? Those products have to be viewed as being secure by design. If we have a data breach, it's going to stink and it's going to cost a lot of money, but typically it's not going to cost lives. And that's really where we need to think about how to strike that balance.
Right. So I guess for a healthcare environment, a couple of things. Obviously, if it's probably worth bringing in an outside professional consultant to take a look at our current practices, make sure they're up to snuff. Training obviously is an important element. Anything else that we didn't cover yet that's important for healthcare professionals to keep in mind?
Yeah. So business continuity, nobody thinks about the after action, right? Like, what do we do if this happens? Because in a lot of these studies that I was researching to prepare for this call, part of the problem is that after action. A vast majority, I think it was something to the tune of 63% of the healthcare organizations that were interviewed by this company called Sophos, they did a study, said, yeah, we didn't get hit in 2020, but we anticipate that we're going to be a target in 2021. Great. So what are you going to do about that? Right. So there are technology controls. There are things that can be preventative or proactive, like AI, like automation, right? Making sure that we're implementing zero trust environments when it comes to accessing data. So there are things that we can do to protect an organization proactively, or try to. But if an incident occurs, you need to have that business continuity and incident response program. And it can't just be on the computer, because if the computer has been, if your network has been attacked and your data has been encrypted, you don't have access to it. So you need to actually make sure you print it out, and multiple people have it. You have to do tabletop exercises. Nothing beats the opportunity to get everybody around a table and start throwing crazy scenarios at them. Like, this just happened. Okay, now this just happened. And oh, by the way, the power went out. Oh yeah, and this happened, the earthquake, whatever it is. Because typically it doesn't just happen one thing, right? It happens where multiple things start to go wrong. Tabletop exercises give you an opportunity not only to see where you're deficient, but to see where you shine. So I highly recommend at least once a quarter there to be, if they can afford to do it, there should be a tabletop exercise where the stakeholders, everyone from executive stakeholders to somebody representing your janitorial staff. Because I'm going to tell you, just like in physical security, the people in your janitorial staff probably know more about your facility than anybody in the facility. And they never get asked to come into, I say this in K through 12, nobody ever asks the lunch ladies to come into an active shooter drill. The lunch ladies know everything, and they know everybody, they know everything about every grade. Nobody invites the janitorial staff and the lunch ladies into an active shooter drill. The same thing happens in healthcare. You need to have stakeholders from every department, because when the poop hits the fan, you need to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do. They need to recognize when something doesn't seem right. They need to be empowered to go up the chain of command and have a reporting structure. What happens when, somebody who's making appointments, their computer goes blank and then some weird thing pops up? Does that person know what they're supposed to do next and who they're supposed to call? Right? Those kinds of things are going to reduce the amount of time it takes to recover. So you have to include all of these things in the long-term planning of an incident.
Absolutely. No, it's some great advice. And it's funny you mentioned tabletop exercises. It was unrelated to technology, but I remember one of the hospitals I worked at, we did a tabletop exercise, and we were just kind of doing a scenario of loss of water in the facility. And then it happened the very next day.
Wow.
It was probably like 13 hours after we finished the tabletop exercise. We're getting calls in the morning that, hey, we don't have water in this one building. There's a big, like one of the main pipes burst.
Yeah, and you bring up a really important point. So emergency management personnel typically will prepare for stuff like that. They'll prepare for weather incidents. They'll prepare for broken pipes and sewer issues. They'll prepare for, God forbid, active shooter situations. But when you talk to an emergency management person and you ask them what to do when there's a cyber incident, they say, oh, talk to IT. That's it.
Yeah.
Right? IT is not prepared to run a business during a cyber incident. And the thing about cyber incidents when it comes to emergency management is it differs than the timeline of a typical emergency. In a typical emergency, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. In a cyber incident, you're typically like towards the end of it when you find out about it, right? They're in there and they're probably in there for a really long time. And now you've got to, do I have my backups? Are my backups affected? How, where are my backups stored? All of those things. And one of the statistics in that study was that in terms of restoring data, hospitals and healthcare industry was about 44% of the people surveyed were able to restore, as opposed to a global average of 57% were able to restore. And the reasons for that were A, they didn't have backups, or their backups were on the same network that was attacked, so they got encrypted, right? So these tabletop exercises are the way to realize, oh, wow, that's a gap, that's a hole. We need to fix that. You don't want to be preparing, you don't want to be building the airplane as you're flying it, right? You want to be prepared as best that you can. So hiring professionals, like you said, having this new set of eyes to come in and look at something is really, really important, because when you're staring at something for so long, you miss the details.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that you alluded to earlier was just the convergence of security and IT. Now, I know some of the bigger healthcare programs I've seen, you may have a systems person who does have some direct connection or interaction with IT, but I don't see it as being a kind of an industry standard. Is that something that you still think will happen down the road?
So shadow IT is defined as technology that's on a network that the IT people don't know about. And every industry suffers from it, every industry, because somebody in some department decided, oh, I want this system. This is really cool. It's going to perform this function and it's going to solve my problem. And then they just go and implement it. And what they don't realize is that as an organization, and especially with a hospital organization, because of HIPAA and other regulatory requirements, certain things have to be done, right? Like it has to be implemented in a certain way. And I think it's more important in the healthcare industry than many other, because it's part of critical infrastructure and it is a prime target, that all department heads, all people that get to make the decision on what kind of technology they use for their department need to be informed about the importance of tying in the InfoSec team and the IT team on all decisions. Because if you get the buy-in from somebody within those parts of the organization, the InfoSec and IT, it's going to be a smoother implementation, and they're going to be more apt to help you. If you do it and then you call them after the fact and say, oh, I need IP addresses. And they're like, IP addresses for what? Oh, 37 terminals that have this new software. They're not going to be very happy about it, right? So again, everybody breaking down the silos and working together, this security culture can be a business enabler. It's not that you can't have those systems, but hey, if you've got an InfoSec person that's involved in the procurement of that system, they can ask the supply chain, right? What are you doing to secure your products? How are you tracking your third-party suppliers? Those are conversations that need to be had before you procure product, not after.
Awesome. Now, as we start to wrap up here, I just want to kind of give you the opportunity to talk about a little bit more about your company and what we can expect from you in the future.
Sure. So right now, I'm really, really excited to be working with organizations on building out compliance. Even though compliance does not equal security, it's a start and a step in the right direction. It builds out a framework. Specifically in the security industry, I want to help integrators build out their security structure and their security posture, both internally as an organization, but also externally to their customers. Because if they're able to have the conversations with the customers, it's going to provide value, right? IT managed services companies have been doing this for decades and they understand it. And from a security integration point of view, it's easier to teach and manage, IT managed service company about cameras and card readers than it is for security integrators to learn about networks. So if you don't start building up that skill set and hiring the talent that has that skill set, security integrators are going to get squeezed out by managed services because they're already tied in with the IT and InfoSec people. They understand the culture, and you're going to see a functional shift. I've already seen it that security functions are being handed within end user organizations are being transferred over to InfoSec and IT. And so that includes the physical security and the InfoSec and the facility security. So they're going to start working with the companies that they're familiar with, unless security integrators can prove value. So I like consulting with the integration companies and also with manufacturers, because again, we need to design products that are secure by design. There are so many manufacturers in the physical security industry that have products that have wonderful technologies, like TPM modules. They work in 802.1x environments, and they work with all different encryptions, but they're turned off. And the reason that they're turned off is because they don't trust that the channel will be smart enough to use them if they turn them on. And there's the missing link. We have to educate the channel as to why we use these technologies and how to use them, talk to the end customer about their policies, and then grow an ecosystem around that customer. And that's how we strengthen our national security, because private industry, our country is vulnerable because our critical infrastructure is managed by private industry. Most of the adversary countries like China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, they own their infrastructure. The government controls it. So if at any moment they decide they want to just disconnect, they proverbially flip a switch and they disconnect. In the United States, and they have the ability to protect those things because they control it. In the United States, critical infrastructure is owned by private industry. So even if the federal government wanted to step in and be the defense, they can't, because they don't have the authority to do so and the jurisdiction to do so. So hospitals and energy companies and all these things that are within our critical infrastructure, education and law enforcement, it's incumbent on them to step it up. And so all of the different facets of their ecosystem and their supply chain have to also in turn step it up. And I'm very passionate about it. And I don't mean to be like an alarmist and Chicken Little running around screaming the sky is falling, but it's that important to me. Like, that's what I said earlier in the conversation. Like, this is a mission. This is not just about, selling switches and firewalls and VPNs. This is truly about protecting our nation and our nation's assets, which are people.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just curious to get this insight from you, but just as an individual, what are some recommendations you would make for us to protect ourselves?
Oh man, so if money were no object, I kid you not, if money were no object, I would spend the vast majority of my time working with K through 12, teaching them about cyber hygiene. Because if we teach young people how to protect themselves and their data and do proper research on the internet, right? And understand when things don't seem right, it could be misinformation or disinformation campaigns or whatever. We make stronger workers for the future. And so as an individual, I always tell people, get a damn password vault. I use LastPass. It's inexpensive. You need to know one password, just make sure it's secure and it's long, and then create it and create auto-generated passwords for every account that you have. It is a step, right? It's that balance between convenience and functionality. It is a step. Every time I have to log into something, I have to log into my LastPass account. But I know that if I'll give you a perfect example. I went to go log on to Target because my son's going to college and I wanted to buy him a little cabinet thing with drawers. And I log on to Target, my Target account, and a thing pops up and it says, you must change your password. Your password was compromised. All right, no big deal. That was one account. I had nothing really important in my Target account, but it was one account. Now, had I used that password on my bank and my, whatever, my work password and all of these things, guess what? That's a much bigger problem now.
Yeah.
So if you do nothing else in life, get a damn password vault. And I actually recommend that to companies that I speak with. Invest in your employees, get them password vaults because they'll use it if you pay for it, require them to use it. That could solve a vast majority of the problems that we have because credentials are all over the dark market on dark web. So if nothing else, get a password vault.
No.
And I could speak for hours on social media and disinformation and misinformation campaigns, so I won't even go there. But just understand, if something that you read seems totally out of whack, it probably is. Stop looking at Facebook for your newsfeed.
Oh man, yeah, that's that's some great advice right there. Probably, all of this was valuable, but I think people would probably benefit the most just from doing that. Awesome. Now, what's the best ways to connect with you? I know I follow Credo Cyber Consulting on LinkedIn, but what are some of the other ways to connect with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Credo Cyber. I'm on LinkedIn personally. Just look me up, Antoinette King. Credo Cyber Consulting on LinkedIn, at Credo Cyber for Instagram and Twitter as well.
Awesome.
I do have a Facebook page, but I barely use it. Sorry. I'm there, I'm on Facebook, but I don't check it. So don't even bother trying to message me.
Well, I was going to say, it's good because we just told people basically not to go there anyway.
Exactly. So, I do it for posterity and the little logo on my website, but other than that, and of course my website, credocyber.com.
Awesome stuff. Well, Antoinette, thank you so much for making the time. I know you're heading out on vacation, so I appreciate you making the time today to do this.
Thank you. This is so much fun. I really appreciate it.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.